Hi there, and welcome to this special edition of Biz Asia on CCTV News. I'm Zheng Lei in Beijing. Our focus tonight, China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, has started its annual two-week meeting. At today's opening, Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao presented the government work report. What are the main targets? What does this mean for policy going forward? We'll slice and dice for you China's economic blueprint with our panel of China experts. But first, the Supreme Military Command of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea says that the Korean War Armistice Agreement was null. In a statement in response to planned US-South Korea military exercises, a spokesperson of the Korean People's Army also said on state TV that the DPRK military would carry out more and stronger countermeasures. The spokesperson added that the DPRK has also decided to halt the work of its delegates at Papum, where the two sides usually meet for communication and negotiations. Back to the focus of tonight's show, Premier Wen Jiabao's annual work report. China will target 7.5% growth in its gross domestic product this year, in line with forecasts. Let's get the roundup of the work report and cross to our reporter Yin Hang, who reported the session in the east side of Beijing. Hey there, Yin Hang.
Good evening, Lei. Actually, the world's second largest economy is now standing at a crossroads after 30 years of rapid development. That's why the report had received a worldwide attention. And Premier Wen Jiabao said in its report that delivered this morning that the Chinese government is going to set its GDP growth target for the year of 2013 at 7.5%, which is almost unchanged compared with the year of 2012. Meanwhile, Chinese government is also going to keep its consumer price inflation number at 3.5%, which is slightly lower than the government target of 4% in the year of 2012. Meanwhile, the government has promised to create more than 9 million new jobs in urban areas and keep the country's unemployment rate below at 4.6%. It will also keep into its proactive fiscal policy by increasing fiscal deficit and government debt. It increased the target of fiscal deficits by 1.2 trillion yuan. And here's a quick listen at what Premier has to say about those targets.
We should guide all the people to shift the focus of their work to speed up the transformation of China's growth model, adjusting the economic structure, and improving the quality and performance of economic growth. That's how we can promote sustained and healthy economic development. In light of these considerations, we believe this year's economic.
And meanwhile, on the policy side, Premier Wen Jiabao also said China is going to carry on its proactive fiscal policy and prudent monetary policy. Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao also said that China is going to unswervingly take expanding its domestic consumption sector as well as investment sector as its long-term strategy for China's economic development. Take a listen to this again.
In the current stage, the role investment plays in promoting economic growth cannot be underestimated. Governmental investment is important in guiding non-governmental investment, but its share of the country's total investment is decreasing. So we must further relax controls over market access for non-governmental investment and stimulate it.
And this only parts of those issues that relates by Premier Wen Jiabao's work report. He also mentioned in this report about the property control measures, as well as China's consumption sector, as well as interest rate reform, as also including the issue of anti-corruption. Back to you, Lei.
Thanks, Yin Hang. Now, to get a brief look at some other key points of the government work report, Junfeng is by the board with more details. Junfeng.
Thanks so much, Zheng Lei. Well, Premier Wen Jiabao's government work report has highlighted some achievements of the past 5 years. Let's put them in numbers. China's GDP has increased by an average annual growth rate of 9.3% to become now the world's second largest economy. Meanwhile, energy consumption per unit of GDP fell by 17.2%. Thanks to strengthening environmental protection awareness. Per capita disposable income of urban residents rose by 8.8% annually, and per capita net income of rural residents rose by almost 10%. The government also laid out major working plans for the year ahead. It will continue taking a proactive fiscal monetary policy and prudent monetary policy, maintain reasonable growth in money supply and credit, as well as prevent some financial crisis here. China will also put forward market-oriented reforms in interest rates and exchange rates and make RMB more international. The government also aims to boost the total foreign trade by 8%. This is in line with the GDP growth of 7.5%. It has stressed the importance of quality rather than quantity. While the report also says basic pensions for enterprise retirees should be raised by 10% in 2013.
For the report in numbers. So we've got a report that covers every aspect of the economy. What are the key takeaways? Let me introduce our panel for you. Mr. Don Durfee, North Asia General Manager at Thomson Reuters, Alberto Forchielli, our founder and managing partner at Mandarin Capital, and also Professor Huo Deming from the National School of Development at Peking University. Let me start with you, Don. In 30 seconds, initial impressions from the work report and the to-do list of the government.
Yeah, I would say that overall it struck me as a pretty cautious work report. There's a lot of issues that were mentioned that we've heard before, issues about economic rebalancing, worries about income inequality, corruption. But there seemed to be a lack of very concrete measures to tackle these kinds of things. I did hear, however, two things that stood out to me. One was a focus on urbanization, and another is on environmental protection. I don't know how concrete these actions will be, but I take that as a hopeful sign.
We'll get to that in more detail later on. And Professor Huo.
Okay, the work report mentioned a lot of things, basically a summary of what has been done in the last 5 years, but I think the change of growth pattern, the way to grow for China, I think it's 9.3%, as Jim Feng just said, but in the future we're going to grow at 7.5 or probably 8%, so we are not going to rely on investment. Instead, we're trying to jack up the consumption. That's the way to sustainable growth, but how we're going to actually achieve that, that is difficult.
More rebalancing ahead. Alberto?
Some things are credible, some are not. I think China will be able to build a social safety net. China will be able to improve the environment and the energy efficiency. I'm more skeptical about state companies reform and financial services opening.
Yep, we're not hearing a whole lot about that. Great. Premier Wen Jiabao's government work report also sparked much debate and discussion in the media. Jun Feng's got more for us.
Thanks, Charlie. Well, Reuters noted that China put its fast-growing consumer class at center stage. Meanwhile, urbanization was considered as a key factor to underpin the country's program of economic development. And AP commented Wen Jiabao's work report was more focused on social well-being over growth. While he noted that it reflected leaders would no longer emphasize growth at all costs and would downshift development to put priority on social programs. BBC shared some views of AP. It noted that China's government work report shows that the central government will place more emphasis on reform and social welfare. But of course, it's the views of people that really count. Send us your views on China's network report via our Sina Weibo account, CCTV Biz Asia, as you can see on the screen. Charlie.
And if you have any questions, shoot them to us as well. We are now heading for a short break. Coming up, our panel discussion on China's economic blueprint this year. Stay tuned. Deng Wei. Oops. Okay, welcome back to Biz Asia on CCTV News. Let's get back to our panel. Don from Thomson Reuters, Alberto from Mandarin Capital, and of course Professor Huo from Peking University. So we've got this work report, we've got these targets, 7.5%, 3.5% inflation, 9 million jobs, 8% foreign trade growth. You oversee about 100 reporters who are writing this up for the world to digest. What are they saying to you, Don?
Well, they're saying that one of the key things is it really comes down to economic rebalancing. China is looking to sort of sustain relatively high levels of growth in the future. If they want to do it in a sustainable way, they need to rebalance the economy. Key to that is urbanization, right? There's two things that I heard. One was talk about focusing on urbanization and also hukou reform. You can't have one without the other. You reform hukou, that allows people to come to the cities. It's going to be extremely challenging and a massive project.
Turning farmers into urbanites, into big spenders.
Urbanization is definitely the key word. Well, we used to say a 10% GDP growth rate can take about 10 million people, new jobs. Now we are shrinking or declining, well, we're reducing it down to 7.5 to 8%. So we're not going to create as much jobs according to the previous growth pattern. So with this urbanization, they're probably going to create many smaller or medium towns, huge metropolitan areas. They're going to give it up. Well, not giving up Beijing, but we're going to create a lot of small cities. That's going to take up jobs. And then, on the other hand, I think China is going to develop a financial system so that this urbanization things could work. Then for the domestic or local governments, they need the money from. So as far as I see that the local government's bond market, especially aimed for this urbanization things, is going to probably be created in the near future. So as to finance
special municipal bonds.
It's generalization as a bond market. Now China's bond market has been is lagging behind. So at this stage, developing a bond market and with urbanization, good combination.
Could be a way forward. Alberto, play the contrarian for us.
No, urbanization is always mentioned as an objective per se, and it's unconvincing because I need to understand what is the driver. Is it going to be driven by industry? Is it going to be driven by service? In service, which service? Financial services, media, what? So urbanization per se is going to create favelas like in Venezuela or Brazil. Okay, so that I don't like. First, people have got to tell me for what reason people will move from the farm to the cities and do what, and then we'll discuss.
Yes, so one of the things that we've been hearing is that already in the cities you have a lot of migrant labor, right?
About 100 million.
These people are already here. You look around Beijing, there's a lot of migrant laborers here already. Yeah. One of the goals I've heard of urbanization is to turn those people into urban residents, call them urban residents, make them part of the social safety net. That allows them to start spending.
Set up schools so the kids can go there.
Yes, a lot of social welfare thing. But, gentlemen, we want to focus on this two digits that's mentioned in the headlines, the 7.5% GDP growth and 3.5% inflation. Is this combination healthy in China?
Well, I would say for the last 10 years, from the last 10 years' experiences, we're growing at on average 10%. At average inflation rate of 3.5%. So I would say inflation rate keeping it at 3.5%, it's very comfortable with the lower growth rates. And we are talking about quality. We're not going to talking about quantity. I think sustainability is the key.
And on sustainability, you mentioned that there was more talk about environmental protection. But do you think that's more talk than walk?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, so in the work report, they did say that they were going to increase the targets for hydro, wind, and nuclear, right? The targets were already pretty high. The increase isn't really that much. One positive sign, we reported the other day that the new environment minister is likely to be Pan Yue, who's a former environmental activist. That's a sign that the government is going to take environmental protection more seriously. Now, he's got huge challenges ahead. Whether he can actually do it, I think remains to be seen.
Alberto, you say China already has too much alternative energy.
Yes, China is the largest producer of wind energy, is going to become the largest producer of solar, and is the largest producer of hydro. But as long as the GDP goes at 7.5% every year, you're going to have a lot of coal. And there is nothing that can substitute for increased coal usage until 2030. But I'm not saying anything new. That's something everybody knows.
Right. You've been doing business in China for like 20 years. You've been here since the 90s, right?
Sure.
So when you consider these new areas of investment, as we just mentioned, clean energy, would you consider stepping into this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the determination and the consensus to invest in clean energy is widespread and is credible.
Do you need to wait until certain conditions are ready? Because you mentioned overcapacity in wind, in solar. Is there still room for you, or you wait until those maneuveration in the policy?
Yes, as usual, because of the successive saving rate and excessive investment rate and overpower of state-owned company, China has been able to run into overcapacity of solar panel and wind turbines. But I still think the whole field of clean energy, like garbage disposal, water filtration and air filtration offers incredible possibilities in China.
Definitely.
Now, this is more on the environmental angle than the clean energy angle.
Professor Huo, I mean, making the economy more balanced means more balanced investment as well. And that could mean opening up more sectors to private investment. How will this work, and might it nudge along SOE or state-owned enterprise reform?
That's a difficult issue because, see, last year we're talking about this balancing of SOEs. You cut down the salaries of SOE workers. That was met with a huge objections. I remember that. So it's not too far away. And if we want to somehow restrict the SOE's capacities at this stage, I don't think it's realistic. Why don't we talk about increasing the potentials for private sectors, private firms? Well, first of all, I would like to see a more lending and borrowing avenues for these private sectors firms.
Making the shadow banks become...
Definitely. If they want to borrow money from the bank, virtually this bank, if the bank do not lend them money, then there got to be something else, other ways for them to facilitate their business operations. And that is something that I have been observing since 2008, the financial crisis. After that, SOEs has so much money to invest, while the private sector or the private business, they're just suffering.
Yeah, Alberto, you have a lot of experience in leading
Alberto's from a country where privatization
reforms in Italy.
Oh, yeah, I mean...
it's next to impossible,
I mean,
right?
a few things, yeah. I mean, state managers love to keep the money and not pay dividends. They hate to pay dividends, and that's the problem. So they keep the money, they reinvest, they have easy borrowing, and they tend to waste money. So the allocation process in China run by SOE is not that as good as it could possibly be. Now, to have the private sector growing, you need two things. You need to give private entrepreneurs access to capital. And borrowing, lending, creating a banking system that can lend to private company, it takes generation. It's just not just a law. You really need to educate generations of bankers. It's not that easy. Then there is a second issue in China, which is the stock market is closed. The IPO is backed up. That's another big issue that we don't want to discuss now.
Yeah.
You were about to say,
well, I was going to say, in this whole sectors of the economy that just aren't really open to private enterprise, right? Telecommunications, for example,
financial
right?
services.
If you were to privatize that and allow startups to happen, you might see just an explosion and job creation, economic growth. I think that's something the government wants to do, but it's very difficult to overcome the resistance from the entrenched SOEs.
Hold that thought. We'll come back to you. And now let's turn to Mr. Duncan Freeman. He is the Senior Research Fellow with the Brussels Institute of Contemporary China Studies. Mr. Duncan, so glad you can join us. China has staged quite a strong performance on the trade sector last year. Of course, it is now the world's biggest exporter, and this year, though, it's set a trade growth target of just 8%. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's certainly a very modest target compared to what has been happening in the last few years, but still I think China will face difficulties. Obviously in the major markets in Europe and in the United States there are significant risks, and it will be difficult for China to diversify away to other markets. So I think it'll still be a very difficult target to reach.
Wow, so more bleak times ahead for external demand. Now, China, of course, has been stepping up its drive to invest overseas. We're seeing double-digit growth, something like 25% per year in terms of outbound investment. And, you know, now the question is how to get those companies to invest wiser. And what are you hearing on that front?
Well, I think there are two things. One is that a lot of Chinese companies, when they go outside of China, they still have very little experience in managing international business, and so they make decisions sometimes which aren't very wise. They don't really do their homework, and they don't understand the business environments where they're investing. So that's one big issue. The other is that the government has a policy of encouraging outward investment, and sometimes that also pushes enterprises, especially perhaps state-owned enterprises, to venture into investments which again are not very wise. And so I think it's two issues really that need to be addressed there. one at the enterprise level and one at the government level.
Thank you so much for joining us. Duncan Freeman joining us from Europe. Now, reform is the buzzword of today's government work report. It lies ahead as the greatest challenge and opportunity for the world's second biggest economy. For more insights on stepping up the reforms and keeping up the momentum, our reporter talked to economist Gu Shengzu. He serves as the vice chairman of the Committee for Internal and Judicial Affairs of the National People's Congress.
深化改革最重要的是要需要
To deepen the reform, the top principle is to stay courageous while being tactical and wise, because reform can be very complicated. The key of all the reforms lies in transitioning government itself so as to achieve a better relationship between the government and the market. As we're coping with global economic downturn, the central government is holding too much power. It needs to spare and decentralize part of its power and hand over the things that it should not have managed, yet fails to manage well.
Our reporter In Hang has been attending the NPC sessions and talking to deputies and listening to what they're saying about China's economic growth and reform. In Hang?
Yes, Lei, like our guests mentioned about lots of issues like hukou, urbanization, including also the financing of private companies I mentioned. But on top of that, lots of attendees say that China's economy is still plagued by inefficient growth model. It also hindered by inequality and inefficiency of its development. Let's take a listen to this.
Improving the growth structure is vital in pushing forward China's growth. The transformation of the economic growth pattern also needs to break up the barrier of the old systems. China's economy has seen rapid growth in the past 30 years. The old way of high investment and low returns should be changed. That's why we need to boost domestic consumption.
Like many attendees have mentioned that China's going to face lots of difficulties in expanding its trade as the international environment are going to remain sluggish. So they're saying that China needs to find a suitable way for themselves to develop its own economy. That's all from me. Back to you.
Certainly. Thank you so much for that report, In Hang. Let's get back to our panel, get back to our conversation. Don from Thomson Reuters, Alberto from Mandarin Capital, and of course Professor Ho from Peking University. Now, we have been talking about some of the macro issues. Let's drill down to some of the issues that are closest to people's hearts. That is income, that is the welfare system, that is housing.
Yes, when we mentioned this, actually, I walked to the streets before the NPC and I talked to some folks on the streets. And among the youngsters, young folks we talked to, about 80% of them are worried about their income. Because when they compare their income to the wealth of the society, and they worry about it, 80% of them are worried about job opportunities. And we do have an incoming senior Weibo follower from Chongqing, and he mentioned, he raised a really brilliant question, whether the 7.5% targeted GDP growth rate, which is the same with last year, means this year's job market conditions, especially for the young graduates, would be less better than last year.
I would say for this 7.5% growth rate, it's not going to create as many jobs as we have seen last 5 to 10 years. But the change lies in the sector. You see, if we have urbanization, then we're talking about total different ball games in comparison with previous 5 years. So it could be that with 7.5%, the income distribution as well as the employment will improve, because simply put, urbanization, I know probably about what something. I have quite confidence in urbanization. So, and that's because somehow people's mentality are changing now. No longer we're believing in 10 million people, 20 million people, those big cities.
One of the things with urbanization, though, is that the kinds of construction, well, it's construction that's required primarily, first and foremost. You get up at hospitals, schools, apartment buildings. Those are relatively low-wage jobs, right? If the students that you're talking to are college students, college graduates, these may not be the kinds of jobs that they want, right? So there may still be a gap between the jobs that are available and their desires. Yeah,
Alberto, you're from a country probably in Europe with a very high unemployment rate now. Do you think China should worry about the job market conditions here? Because when we compare ourselves with the United States and Europe, we should be laughing.
Yeah, and keep laughing. No, I think one thing you should be very careful and don't get too enthusiastic about the welfare state. Okay, be balanced.
It doesn't solve all problems.
Okay, I mean, I come from a continent where there is an excess of welfare to the point where people have no incentive to work. So I think one of the things that get this country going is also this anxiety about the future. You really don't want to take it all away.
It's a motivator.
This is my personal experience.
This is China's edge. So it's good to be worried about job prospects, but maybe not so good if you can't get married because you don't have a house. Property prices, huge topic. I mean, Don.
Yeah, right. So controlling property prices has been a big focus of the government for a number of years now. And prices are on the rise again. I think we've had 7 consecutive months of rises. Forecast is probably for 7% rise in housing prices. Stronger in some cities than others. I think Beijing, Shanghai, you might see it go up much more sharply, which is a worry.
Well, with respect to the housing prices, the statistic I've seen is that, yes, there's a mild increase of housing prices on a year-to-year basis. The highest among the 70 bigger and small or medium cities, there's about 6% annual growth rate. So I would say it's a moderate because you think about disposable income and all that personal income is probably going at the same speed. I certainly hope that kind of a pace will continue so that, for instance, what we have seen between the year 2006 and 2008, that growing at 50%, 60% of the housing prices, that will never happen. But 6%, 5%, people have fundamental demand to improve their houses. They want to buy new houses simply because their old houses is obsolete.
And the mother-in-law effect.
Yeah. Definitely.
And Professor, we just have to face this cruel reality that within the 3rd, 4th ring road of Beijing and also those, city centers in Shanghai, Guangzhou, first-tier cities, we're looking at apartment of 100 square meters fit for a young couple, priced at about 5 to 6 million yuan, about $1 million. This is just impossible for young couples. Should they get used to this fact?
I would say advise them to move out of the 2nd and 3rd ring road. Think about London or Manhattan.
New York, yeah.
Oh, definitely. For young couples, they probably the better way for them to move out of the 5th ring road and take the subways, go to work. And that is a trend. And stick to 2nd and 3rd ring road and expecting to live there comfortably for the rest of their lives. And if they're now 30 years old, come on, give me a break.
I think that comes down to the income gap as well. I mean, the people that you talk